Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Jacek Jaworek. This is a man who's on the run because of the horrible crimes he committed in July of last year. He took the lives of 3 people who were a part of his own family. One of the family members was able to escape this horrific nightmare and was able to make it safely to the neighbor's house where they could call the authorities for help. Since these horrific crimes, he has gone missing and no one is sure of his whereabouts. Right now it is speculated that he likely escaped from Poland where the crimes took place, but his exact whereabouts remain quite the mystery.
At number 9, a man on the run. So another time in 2015, a man tried to escape a country through a bag. In Lima, Peru, a friend was dragging a really heavy bag and was acting nervous. He acted so nervous that officials asked him to open his bags. He did try to talk himself out of it, but the officials were unrelenting. So he gave up and opened his bag. The man inside the bag that was hiding was greeted by a dog that was sniffing the bag, which kind of a nice greeting. And then the man in the bag got out of it pretty casually, just knowing that he was caught. There was no use running away. Now, they didn't even make it to bag check. Did they really think they were gonna make it and flee Peru? I mean, if the man got checked in as a bag, there would still be the x-ray scan and they would see a human body in there. I just really want to know how far they think this plan would go. All the way? I doubt it.
In our number 8 spot today, we have Ruja Ignatova. This woman is a convicted fraudster who has been on the run since 2017 after she disappeared when she was found out to be the founder of a Ponzi scheme. The scam, known as OneCoin, which was a scam that was surrounding cryptocurrency, has been referred to as one of the biggest scams in history. US prosecutors have claimed that the scheme was so huge it brought in approximately $4 billion worldwide. Ruja had impeccable timing as she disappeared right at the time that there was a secret US warrant being filed for her arrest. Despite being on the run since 2017, in 2019 she was charged in absentia by US authorities for wire fraud, securities fraud, as well as money laundering. This lady is living the real life Ozark. It's absolutely insane. This case truly is something you'd expect to see on TV, but she's just living it. Despite the years it's been, international authorities are still doing their best to find out where she has been hiding, and this includes raids that have happened just this year. In our number 7 spot today, we have the vending machine killer. Okay, so for this one, we have to know that apparently there are a lot of vending machines in Japan. Like, it's said that there's one for every 23 people. It's a lot of vending machines. So in 1985 in Hiroshima, there were 12 people who passed away and 35 people who were seriously injured from being poisoned with a chemical herbicide. When the string of poisonings were investigated, authorities realized that they had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they had all had the same drink shortly before falling ill. So around the time of this whole thing, there was a company that had launched a marketing campaign where they gave a free drink with every purchase made from a vending machine. When people didn't want their free drink, they would leave it on top of the vending machine for the next person who came along, which is super nice and thoughtful and kind, and of course that means that some horrible person out there had to ruin it for everyone. So, as it turns out, someone was taking these drinks, lacing them with poison, and then leaving them on top of the machines for some random stranger to come around, drink it, and then be sick or unfortunately pass away. It is almost impossible for authorities to be able to track down whoever was doing this, because you have to narrow down where the person picked up the drink, and in 1985 there weren't as many CCTV cameras as there are now. So unfortunately, whoever was responsible for a mass poisoning of strangers is still out there somewhere. In our number 6 spot today, we have Jan Marsalek. Jan is said to be a white-collar criminal who fled and went into hiding in June 2020 after the Wirecard scandal, as he was the COO of the company. If you're unfamiliar, Wirecard was a German payment processing firm that had years and years of allegations of malpractice against them. The entire thing really came to a peak in 2019 when the Financial Times published some of the investigations into the complaints, as well as internal documents. In the end, in 2020, Wirecard filed for insolvency after it was realized that 1.9 billion euros were missing. If anyone finds that missing $1.9 billion, my DMs are wide open. It is believed that Jan is one of the main culprits in the entire scandal, and to be fair, fleeing the country doesn't really make you look very innocent. It is believed that he may be located in Russia now, but since August of 2020, Interpol has issued a red notice for him, which requests that worldwide law enforcement be on the lookout for him in order to arrest him, where he can then be extradited. In our number 5 spot today, we have Bible John. John. This is the name used in reference to an unidentified serial killer who was responsible for Scotland's largest manhunt. All three of his victims were young brunette women between the ages of 25 to 32, and they had all met him at the Barrowland Ballroom, which was a dance and music venue in Glasgow. Despite this important information, he has never been able to be identified. This was actually the first time in Scotland in which the Crown Office authorized the publication of a composite drawing of the man who was suspected of the crimes. The reason he is called Bible John is said to be because he apparently repeatedly quoted the Bible, which is, I don't know, just really creepy. Most of the key information in the investigation came from one of the victim's sisters, Jean Langford, who had been in the same taxi as her sister and the suspected killer on the night he took her life. She was able to give a description of the man and was able to give information that helped authorities create a profile of him. Despite her incredibly helpful information, he was never able to be caught, and Jean passed away in 2010. While Bible John might have also passed away by now, I still hope that one day authorities can figure out who he was. In our number 4 spot today, we have Monica Witt. Monica is a former United States Air Force technical sergeant as well as a defense contractor who has been on the run since 2018. Despite her high-ranking position and high security clearance, she is on the run because she defected to Iran in 2013. It is said that from 2013 up until she was found out that she was using her position in order to spy on the United States and relay that information back to the group she was working for. She used different fake Facebook accounts, and it is said that the information she gave included the classified true name and counterintelligence activities of a US intelligence operative. This is of course a problem regardless of how important this operation was, but it is said that this information she shared had the potential to cause serious damage to the United States national security. It is an absolutely wild story, and Monica is still out there on the run, hiding from the consequences of her betrayal and espionage. In our number 3 spot today, we have John Pyle. This horrible human isn't an undercover spy or insane fraudster. He is just a monster who committed certain crimes that are unfortunately a little more common than any of us would like to know. Because of the nature of his crimes, I can't talk about them here in this video, but let's just say that he is definitely one of the worst kinds of criminals out there. On June 24th, 2016, authorities searched his home after receiving 3 tips relating to his crimes. The amount of and the severity of the incriminating evidence they found during this search ended up landing him charged with 30 different second-degree felonies, which could bring a sentence of 450 years in prison. He was arrested the same day and posted a bail bond of $90,000. Why he was able to get bail, I'll never know. And he also had to surrender his passport. Flash forward 16 months to October 23rd, 2017, and of course, this guy doesn't show up for his hearing, and thus we have a fugitive on the run. Even though he gave up his passport, it is said that he was still somehow able to board a Carnival cruise ship that was bound for Cozumel, Mexico. He got off the ship when it arrived and never reboarded. Despite efforts from international authorities as well as bounty hunters, he has still yet to be located. The last time he was seen was in February of 2018 in Nuevo Leon. In our number 2 spot today, we have Alejandro Castillo. Alejandro is an American man who was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in October of 2017. He was added to the list after disappearing after taking the life of a woman named Sandy Lai Lee. Sandy was a co-worker of his, and it is said that the two might have briefly dated. Basically, apparently, she had lent him some money that he had never repaid. On August 9th, 2016, Alejandro texted Sandy saying that he would like to repay her, and they agreed to meet at a Quick Trip. Alejandro was driven to this meeting by Amaya Feaster, who is said to be his new girlfriend. It is believed that once at the meeting, instead of repaying her, Alejandro forced Sandy to take out all of the money from her bank account, which is said to have been about $1,000. After this, the pair drove Sandy to a wooded area, where it is said that he then took her life. After this, the pair fled the scene of the crime and drove from North Carolina to Phoenix, Arizona. They then ended up fleeing into Mexico from there. While Amaya turned herself into authorities on October 20th, 2016, Alejandro remains at large and on the run. Despite the years it's been, I hope that one day he is found so he can be brought to justice for this horrible, senseless crime. In our number 1 spot today, we have Bhadrash Kumar Patel. This is a man who, in 2015, was in the United States in Hanover, Maryland, with his wife Palak. It is said that the pair were traveling to visit relatives and that they had both taken a job at a local Dunkin' Donuts that was owned by one of their family members. It was at this location that on April 12th, 2015, 2015, it is said that he took the life of his wife. Surveillance footage shows the two of them walking together in the kitchen around 9:30 p.m. that day before they disappear out of view behind some racks that were in the kitchen. Shortly after this, he reappears alone, turns the oven off, and leaves. Authorities believe that this all may have been over an argument where one of the couple wanted to return to India while the other wanted to stay in the United States. After customers of the store began getting worried when no one came to take their order, they thankfully decided to approach a nearby police officer. The officer went to investigate, and that is when he sadly found her body. The last sighting of him was on April 13th at around 10 a.m. at Newark Penn Station in New Jersey. He had taken a hotel shuttle there and has never been seen since. There is currently a $100,000 reward for information that leads to his whereabouts. It truly is an unimaginable horror, and I hope that this monster is one day brought to justice. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the West Mesa Bone Collector. This is the name used to describe an unidentified serial killer who is said to be responsible for taking the lives of 11 different women whose remains were found buried in the desert of West Mesa in 2009. It is thought that this could be one person, or it could potentially be linked to some sort of group. There have been tips throughout the years, and authorities have worked hard to try and get to the bottom of these crimes, but still the killer remains at large. There have been a few different suspects throughout the years, but there hasn't been enough concrete evidence to charge anyone with the crimes just yet. What's interesting about this case is that although the remains were found in 2009, according to authorities, upon examining satellite images, it is believed that the last of the remains were placed there in 2005.
Coming in at number 9 is Vasilis Paliaukostas. From the name you can probably guess that Vasilis is Greek and was accused of being the mastermind behind kidnapping industrialist Yorios Milonas. Greek names are very hard, you guys, just give me a break. The ransom paid for him was eventually traced back to Vasilis, making him the prime and only suspect. Then in 2000, he was convicted for kidnapping the CEO of Hyperglue Bros back in 1995 and sentenced to 25 years in jail. In June of 2006, two of his accomplices hired a sightseeing helicopter and then hijacked it and forced the pilot to fly to the prison at gunpoint. Guards thought the helicopter were prison inspectors and let the prisoners be flown to a cemetery next to the jail where they all fled, Vasilis included. He was recaptured in 2008 but escaped yet again a year later by helicopter again. A rope ladder was thrown down for him and his cellmate as the helicopter hovered above the jail courtyard. Guards tried firing at the lady in the helicopter, but she had a damn automatic rifle, so they obviously lost. The helicopter was found abandoned in a suburb in Athens with the pilot bound and gagged. There's currently a €1 million bounty placed on any information about Vasilis' whereabouts. Honestly, pat on the back for me for trying to pronounce these Greek names. They all are complicated as hell.
In our number 8 spot today, we have the Beer Man. This is the surprisingly low-key name given to the unidentified serial killer who took the lives of at least 6 people in Mumbai, India between October 2006 and January of 2007. It's a lot of people in a very short amount of time. The reason this unidentified monster is called the Beer Man is due to one fact about each crime scene, which ended up being how they linked these crimes together in the first place. This was the presence of beer bottles that were found scattered next to each of the bodies that were found. Of course, it's been over a decade since the crimes were committed, so it's definitely upsetting that this person hasn't been caught yet. Mumbai police have investigated and interviewed hundreds of people, but still haven't quite collected the evidence they need to be certain of the suspect. In our number 7 spot today, we have Joseph McCool. So Joseph was one part of a scheming trio. He, along with 2 other men named Cameron Campbell and Donald Manning, formed a company called Brixton Group. This group was built on promising a pretty stellar deal where an investment would guarantee you a 10% return per month, and that it was risk-free because the money was actually insured by the State Bar of California. And not only this, but also this money would be lent to countries that were experiencing war in Eastern Europe so that they would be able to purchase refrigerators for citizens who were impoverished. Wow, that's quite a deal, isn't it? I don't know, something about it seems too good to be true, but maybe that's because I know what happens next. Of course, in 2006, it turns out that a grand jury indicted the 3 men because, well, I mean, there were no fridges, there was no insurance as promised, and of course, there was no monthly return, 10% or otherwise. Both Cameron and Donald pleaded guilty to their charges of fraud and conspiracy, and they served their time for their crimes. But not good old Joe. No, of course, that guy has to flee and just disappear into the wind. Some authorities believe he may be hiding in Europe, while others believe he may be in the Philippines. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Honolulu Killer. This is another one of those pesky, horrifying, unidentified serial killers who, of course, was active in and around Honolulu, Hawaii. These crimes took place in 1985 and 1986, and throughout those years it is said that whoever is responsible for these crimes took the lives of at least 5 women. The women seemingly didn't have any connection to each other as they were from all different walks of life, but because of the gruesome similarities of each crime, authorities were able to determine that they were likely committed by the same person. Despite the years it's been, the perpetrator has never been identified and could still be out there somewhere, hiding from taking responsibility for their actions. In our number 5 spot today, we have John and Julianne Dimitrion. Back with another husband and wife team, this pair were mortgage brokers turned fraudsters. They were last seen in July of 2010, which was just before they were set to appear in a federal court in Honolulu to face the consequences of their schemes, which they had previously pled guilty to. Basically, the pair had another company called Mortgage Alliance, and this company would target homeowners who were in trouble and facing things like foreclosure. The pair would offer to purchase their homes and help repair their credit. They claimed that they would invest the funds, but rather than doing this, they instead kept the money for themselves to fund their expensive hobbies, which included collecting things like high-end electronics, airsoft replica firearms, and designer purses, shoes, and lingerie. At least they were using their money responsibly. You can tell that they just really needed it, which I respect. The pair has, of course, been on the run for over a decade now, which means that they truly could be anywhere, and authorities have received tips of their potential whereabouts from all over the world. Currently, there is a $10,000 reward that the FBI is offering for any information that leads to their arrest. In our number 4 spot today, we have Jason Derek Brown. This piece of work has been missing ever since November of 2004. That's quite a long time, but that doesn't mean authorities are giving up looking for him. Jason fled from Phoenix, Arizona in that year after he allegedly took the life of an armored car guard who was outside of a movie theater. After committing this horrific crime, he then took the money and ran. On the FBI website, where it details his crimes as well as other things about him and who to contact with any information, gives like a little bio on Jason, and in it says that he enjoys being the center of attention and that he clearly likes showing off his luxurious lifestyle. It's crazy how many of these people who are known for like trying to flaunt their actually stolen lifestyle. It's just wild. Another thing that the website reminds us of is that he should be considered armed and extremely dangerous, so just be careful out there. In our number 3 spot today, we have the I-70. This is the name of what is believed to be an unidentified serial killer who is known to have taken the lives of 6 store clerks in the Midwest in the spring of 1992. The reason he is referred to as the I-70 killer is because most of the stores were just a few miles off of Interstate 70. While most of his victims were women, there was one man, but it is believed that he may have been expecting a female employee. The killings were clearly the main objective of his crimes, considering the fact that at each scene there was only a small amount of cash that was taken. Aside from these initial 6 crimes, it is thought that he also might be responsible for the deaths of 3 more store clerks in Texas in 1993 and 1994, as well as 1 more in Indiana in 2001. This story has been featured on episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted, and Dark Minds, but despite this, whoever is responsible has never been identified. In our number 2 spot today, we have Victor Guerrena. Back in September of 1983, Victor was 25 years old and was a trusted employee of the West Hartford, Connecticut Wells Fargo Express Company, but on September 12th, that all changed. After working throughout the day and completing the scheduled rounds of currency collection from the local banks, Victor held his co-workers hostage before tying them up, handcuffing them, and injecting them with a mysterious substance he claimed would leave them unable to move. After doing this, Victor proceeded to take about $7 million, which was one of the largest cash robberies robberies in US history at the time. His co-workers were later able to get themselves untied and they called authorities, but by that time Victor was gone. They found his car, but it had been abandoned, and of course the money was gone. They later found out that Victor was a part of a larger group who had orchestrated this entire thing, and they also found out that part of the money was used to purchase a surface-to-air missile that was later launched at FBI headquarters in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Thankfully, it turned out to be a huge waste of money because it did little damage, and fortunately, no one was injured. 2 years later, there were 14 people who were arrested in Puerto Rico, Massachusetts, and Texas as they were found to be involved in the entire operation, but Victor once again escaped capture and has not been seen since. In our number 1 spot today, we have Glenn Stewart Godwin. Man, this guy definitely has quite the history. So basically, in 1980, Glenn was working in California and didn't really have too much of a criminal record. For some reason, he and his roommate, however, decided to make a plan to rob someone that they knew who was once a friend of theirs. Of course, things go awry and it turns into a botched robbery, and Glenn ends up taking the life of the person that they were robbing. Also, this isn't necessarily important to what we were talking about today, but it's just so unhinged I couldn't leave it out. In an attempt to destroy the evidence, Glenn tried to blow up the crime scene. The explosive went off, but obviously they were still able to figure out who committed the crime. Both Glenn and his roommate were both tried and convicted for the crimes in 1983. This of course is not where the story ends, however. In 1987, Glenn tried to escape prison and failed, and this landed him at a higher security prison, Folsom State Prison, which is actually a maximum security prison. Somehow, once at this new one though, he attempted another escape and this time was successful. He fled to Mexico where he tried unsuccessfully to be a part of an illegal drug trade. He was arrested again and sentenced in Mexico, and this is when American authorities began the process of trying to get him extradited. During this process, Glenn decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take the life of an inmate who was a member of the Mexican drug cartel, which very obviously slowed the process of extradition. This gave him time to plan another escape, which he did in 1991, and since then he has been on the run. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Angel Resendiz. Also known as the Railroad Killer, Angel is said to have committed somewhere around 23 horrific crimes during his spree in both the United States and Mexico in the 1990s. He went on to become known as the Railroad Killer because of the fact that most of his crimes were committed near railroads, where he had just jumped off of trains he was using to travel around the country. Most of his crimes took place in the homes of those he harmed, and usually after the crimes he'd linger around to eat their food and sometimes steal their sentimental items. Sometimes he'd even take jewelry to re-gift to his mother and sister. In June of 1999, he was listed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, and when his sister saw him there, she was worried he would continue harming people, so she thankfully contacted the authorities. After this, they were able to convince him to surrender and he was sent to trial. In the end, he was sentenced to death by the jury, and although there were multiple appeal attempts, his death warrant was signed, and on June 27th, 2006, he received his sentence.
Coming in at number 9 is John Paul Sr. As an American racing driver, John won the FIA World Challenge for Endurance Drivers in 1978 and 1980, and he won the Trans Am Cat 2 in the year in between, and that's about it in terms of his achievements. Now let's go in chronological order. In 1979, custom agents discovered weed residue on his boat and then found 710 kilograms of it in a nearby truck, which got him 3 years of probation. Then in 1981, his wife, who he had separated from, vanished into thin air, and then he divorced her. Very odd, no investigation into it, but moving on. Then in 1983, a man called Stephen Carson was shot 5 times in Florida, and he claimed it was John who shot him. He was then arrested before fleeing right before his trial. He was caught in Switzerland and then extradited the hell back to the US, where he was imprisoned by 1986. Then he tried to escape, failed, and was eventually granted parole in 1999. But there is more. After he got out, he met an office manager called Colleen Wood. It was a whirlwind romance. She sold her house and quit her job and moved in with him on his boat so they could go on some honeymoon round the world boat trip or something. But the next December, she too had disappeared into thin air. Paul was suspected but not charged, and he too then magically disappeared. A randomer saw him in the Fiji Islands and reported him, but nothing happened. The FBI are still looking for him to question him on Colleen's disappearance, and I feel like they should add his first wife's case into it as well, like nobody's looking for her. They should be.
In our number 8 spot today we have Richard Chase. This evil person is said to have taken the lives of 6 people within the span of a month between 1977 and 1978. That's a lot of people in a very short amount of time, which is absolutely terrifying. Before his crimes, Richard's life was already full of terrible stories and horrific acts that had him spending time in mental institutions before his crime spree. While at these facilities he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but after going through treatment and beginning medication he was deemed to no longer be a threat to society and was released into his mother's care. Here's where things take a turn for the worse, however. Instead of helping take care of Richard, his mother instead weaned him off of his medication and got him all set up with his own apartment. Nice. Really helpful and cool of her. Initially when he moved into the apartment he had roommates, but eventually they all moved out and he was alone, which is when things really got wild. He began killing various animals, which he would then eat raw, sometimes mixing the organs with Coca-Cola in a blender and then drinking it. It's horrible. After this he would unfortunately go on his killing spree, which had horrific details and would only end when he was startled by a visitor at the home of where his final crime took place. He fled the scene, but he was later caught and stood trial. Although there were many attempts to have him be spared of the death sentence, in the end this didn't work. In December of 1980, Richard was found passed away in his jail cell after taking too many of his prescribed medication. In our number 7 spot today we have Rodney Alcala. Rodney is a horrible monster who was convicted and sentenced to death for 5 killings that he committed in California from 1977 to 1979. He also received an additional 25 years to life after pleading guilty to 2 other killings in New York in 1971 and 1977. Rodney got away with his crimes for a while because he wasn't the top of the list of suspects, because he was said to be the quote charming photographer. Rodney is often referred to as the dating game killer because of his appearance on the show, which, with what we now know about him, is absolutely horrifying. What's crazy is that he actually won the show he was on, but the episode's bachelorette refused to go on a date with him because she found him creepy. This is just a reminder to always trust your instincts. It isn't exactly known just how many victims Rodney had. It is potentially thought that it could be much higher than the number he was convicted for. In July of last year, Rodney passed away in prison at the age of 77. In our number 6 spot today we have Charles Cullen. This guy used to be a nurse who took the lives of his patients throughout his career, and he may be one of the worst serial killers ever recorded. He confessed to taking the lives of 40 people, but through subsequent interviews it became apparent that the number was way higher than 40, he just couldn't remember the names of all of them. But, of course, he could remember the details of all of his crimes against them. His crimes started in 1988 and spanned over a decade into 2003. In October of 2003, when a patient at a hospital passed away from low blood sugar, the authorities were called. This person was Charles' final victim, and authorities began looking into him and investigating his past employment history. On December 12, 2003, authorities were arresting him and charging him with only 1 count of his crimes, but he ended up admitting to 40. He ended up pleading guilty to his crimes and arranged a plea deal where authorities would not seek the death penalty if he cooperated. During one of his court proceedings, he continuously asked the judge to step down and apparently repeatedly chanted for 25 minutes straight, even after he was restrained and gagged for his outbursts. It is thought that his victims might be up in the 400 range, which is truly just unbelievable. In our number 5 spot today we have John Allen Muhammad and John Lee Malvo. This pair is referred to as the DC Snipers, and they were responsible for a series of coordinated attacks during a 3-week period in October of 2002. The pair took the lives of 10 people and critically injured 3 others during this spree, although their crimes spanned even before this and involved even more people. Their crimes were random and terrifying. People would just be going about their everyday tasks when this horrific pair would strike. Through a series of quote-unquote mistakes the pair made, they were able to be caught by authorities and arrested. In September of 2003, John Allen was sentenced to death, and this sentence was carried out in November of 2009. John Lee, on the other hand, was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences, but very recently it was determined that his sentence needs to be re-looked at because of his young age when the crimes were committed. In our number 4 spot today we have Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. A 2 for 1 of the most horrific kind, this pair was often referred to as the Tool toolbox killers. They received this name because most of what they used to commit their crimes would be items normally stored in a household toolbox. The pair committed 5 of these crimes in Southern California over a 5-month period in 1979. In the end, what led to their capture was when Roy met up with a friend with whom he had previously been incarcerated with. He confessed to the crimes to this person in great detail, and you know what this person did? They consulted their attorney about this horrifying confession, who then advised them to go to the authorities with the information. Thank goodness. Authorities, while they didn't have the evidence necessary to charge the men with the crimes at that time, were able to, through surveillance, find other things to arrest them for, while they searched their homes to find the evidence that they really did need. The pair stood trial, and in the end, Lawrence was sentenced to death, and Roy, who accepted a plea bargain and agreed to testify against Lawrence, received a life sentence. Lawrence died of natural causes while on death row in December of 2019, as did Roy at the California Medical Facility in 2020. FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas described Lawrence as the most disturbing individual for whom he has ever created a criminal profile. In our number 3 spot today we have Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story truly is horrific. He is one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness, where he would then stalk them like prey. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrifying crimes, he was just a soft-spoken baker. Robert was heading to church by day and prowling the streets at night. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was a badass named Cindy Paulson, who was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She then went to authorities and told them what happened, and this led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all the evidence they needed lied. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In our number 2 spot today we have William Bonin. This horrible person is said to be responsible for taking the lives of 21 young men in Southern California from May of 1979 to June 1980. It is said that on at least 12 of these occasions he was assisted by one of his 4 known accomplices, and it is even speculated that he might be responsible for 15 more of these crimes that evidence hasn't officially been able to connect him to. He was often referred to as the freeway killer because of the fact that most of the bodies were found along the freeway of Southern California. The police surveilled William until they could catch him in the act, which they did. In the beginning he claimed innocence. I mean, they caught him in the act, it's kind of dumb to claim innocence, but after receiving an impassioned letter from one of the victim's mothers, which asked him to please share the location of her son's body, he confessed his guilt. But he made sure to clarify that it wasn't so the mother could be at peace or so that her pain could be eased. No, of course not. Instead he said, quote, "I was dying for a hamburger and I knew if I went out with the cops they would get me a hamburger." At his first trial, the prosecutor described him as, quote, "the most arch-evil person who ever existed." William was convicted on 14 of his crimes and was sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row before his sentence was carried out in 1996. In our number 1 spot today we have Israel Keyes. Israel is quite a prolific serial killer and truly is a terrifying person. While everyone on this list is horrible, Israel is particularly scary because of the fact that he had no MO or type. He just killed at random. In fact, he was so prepared for these random crimes that he left kill kits all over the US so that he would be prepared for whenever whoever he chose crossed his path. It isn't quite clear how many of these crimes he committed, and many missing persons reports that are still open could potentially be linked to him. It is said that Israel had a sort of admiration and obsession with other prolific serial killers like Ted Bundy or Robert Hansen, who we already talked about today. He even said, quote, "I probably know every single serial killer that's ever been written about. It's kind of a hobby of mine." So creepy. In March of 2012, Israel was finally apprehended and was to stand trial for his crimes, but unfortunately while waiting for trial, he went on to take his own life. He left behind a note and a drawing of 11 skulls, which led authorities to believe that this may be the number of victims he had.
Starting us off with number 10 is Jack the Stripper, not to be confused with his earlier inspiration Jack the Ripper. So back in 1964 and 65, there occurred in London London, England, the Hammersmith nude murders. Those murders encompassed the brutal killing of 6 prostitutes, all of whom were found naked inside or near the River Thames. He killed 2 women before the 6th, and it's not confirmed he was the perpetrator, but it was very likely. The first early victim was 21-year-old Elizabeth Figg, who was found strangled and naked on a north bank of the river. The second victim was 22-year-old Gwyneth Reese, the third was Hannah Tailford, then came Irene Lockwood, Helen Barthélemy, the 6th was Mary Fleming, and the last 2 were Frances Brown and Bridget O'Hara, but interestingly enough, these 2 girls weren't found anywhere near the river. A sketch of the murderer made him seem quite young at the time, and despite there being many suspects, the person was never captured, meaning someone is hiding out there who's killed 8 people and probably more.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the Long Island serial killer. Also known as the Craigslist Ripper, the LISK is an unidentified suspect who is believed to have taken the lives of 10 to 16 people over the last 20 years. The victims so far that are known have been sex workers who used Craigslist to advertise their work. After the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert, police were searching an area along the Ocean Parkway, and that is when they began to discover the remains of the victims. The first 4 were found in December of 2010, with another 6 being found in March and April of 2011. As of December 2015, the FBI is now officially involved in the investigation. There has been a suspect in this case, but any formal charges have not been laid in terms of these crimes. The most recent evidence in regards to these cases was a belt found at the scene of the crime, which may potentially belong to the killer. At the same time, it was announced that new scientific evidence was being used in the investigation, but these announcements came just last year, so we have yet to receive any further updates. Hopefully this case is solved quickly so that the families of the victims can receive justice and this terrible person is off the streets for good.
At number 8, we have Bible John. You son of a gun. The Bible John is an unknown serial killer that killed 3 women in Scotland back at the end of the 60s. The man had a specific type: young, brunette, attractive. Kinda sounds like me, to be honest. Now, each woman had met him at the Barrowland Ballroom and then I guess got led away by him. The first victim was 25-year-old Patricia Docker, who was found in a garage doorway. Cause of death: strangulation. The second victim was 32-year-old mother of 3, Jemima McDonald, who actually had eyewitnesses. They saw her leaving with a brunette tall man who had a Glaswegian accent and kept quoting the Bible, hence the name Bible John. The 2 murders gave up no suspects, and initially the police didn't even think they were murdered by the same person, despite all the shocking similarities between both crimes. The third victim was 29-year-old Helen Putek, who had been badly beaten and raped. Helen met the man with her sister Jean, and he had introduced himself as John. When the third case was brought to light, it was clear they had a serial killer on their hands, and despite having countless suspects including serial killer Peter Tobin, there was no arrest or conviction made. Bible John never killed again, but he's still out there somewhere when he should be in jail. Filling at number 7 slot is William Morales. So this man was the chief bomb maker for the Armed Forces of National Liberation, which was a Puerto Rican paramilitary organization that wanted Puerto Rico to be independent. William had joined the FALN by 1970 and was implicated in around 50 bombings within 4 years. The worst incident occurred in January of 1975 when the Francis Tavern Museum was bombed, killing 4 people and injuring over 50. William was actually interviewed by the FBI in 76 but was let go since they thought he was just an activist and not a suspect. Oh boy, was you wrong. 2 years later, William was in the middle of making a pipe bomb, but he messed up. The timer on his bombs was set by the hour hand, but he had filed down the minute hand by accident, and so the bomb detonated in his hand 4 hours early, and he got it bad. He lost an eye, 9 fingers, his lips, his jaw was fractured, and of course, he had passed out. When he woke up, he tried destroying the evidence before the police could get there, but when they did, authorities found 200 pounds of explosives and 66 sticks of dynamite, and they took him to a hospital because, criminal as he may have been, his injuries were extensive and dire. He was convicted in 1979 and sentenced to 99 years in jail, but after being moved from prison to Bellevue General Hospital, he managed to escape out of his window. He quickly fled to Mexico, and despite being caught, he wasn't extradited and then just went to Cuba to live since being given political asylum. But till this day, he's still on the FBI's most wanted terrorist list with a reward of $100,000 being offered for him. Now, at number Number 6 is Ismael El Mayo Zambada. Now this man is suspected to be a massive drug lord and leader of the Sinaloa cartel, because believe it or not, Narcos Mexico was based on a true story. He started off smuggling a few kilos here and there before solidifying himself as a cocaine trafficker. When El Padrino was arrested, his cartel split into two factions, the Tijuana cartel and the Sinaloa cartel. In 2006, the government launched a major offensive against drug trafficking and the Tijuana cartel got screwed, which led the Sinaloa cartel swoop in and take their territories, and thus war ensued. Their cartel brings in multi-tons of cocaine and distributes them all over the US. He's been wanted by Mexico's Attorney General since 1998. People think he had plastic surgery done so he would become unrecognizable just so he wouldn't have to leave Mexico and live in hiding. The FBI is offering $5 million for any information about him. Damn, Zeddy El Mayo. Gotta go on. Coming in at number 5 is Ani Nuvoyen. Now good old Ani over here was the biggest perpetrator of employment fraud in Estonia ever, and this is how he did it. Don't get any ideas. Now he would post huge ads on behalf of Interwork Corporation about various jobs in the Middle East, Europe, and South America. People who applied had to pay a fee in advance to pay for the foreign passport, travel fees, etc. And keep in mind, unemployment was at a high of 17%, and the fee he was asking for was 2,335 kroon, despite the average salary at the time being just 1,070 kroon. He also used many designer brands as tactics by saying they were limited jobs, so people started bribing him 1,200 kroons to be bumped up in the queue for a job. Ani told everyone that visas, info, tickets, everything would be handed over to them on March 23rd, 1999. But alas, his office had already closed back in February, so when the job seekers got there, they found all their documents that they had sent in the trash. But honestly, they should have done more research. One of Ani's listed business addresses was a literal wasteland. Like, come on people. Around 3,000 to 5,000 people got scammed by him, making him a hefty profit. By 1993, Ani started going by the name Daniel Rosenberg and was advertising shady cars online and again defrauding people. Then the next year he went to Norway and started offering impoverished people jobs in Bulgaria, again manipulating 400 people. This guy made over 10 million kroons and was never caught. He went around defrauding half of Europe and wasn't caught. Come on now. And number 4 is Christopher Dale Flannery, aka Mr. Rent-A-Kill. This Australian contract killer had it rough from the start. By 17 years old, he'd been convicted of carrying firearms, police assault, housebreaking, and more. When he was finally released from jail, he became a bouncer, but seeing how that was boring, he moved on to contract killing, as everybody does. His first kill was a barrister called Roger Wilson, but since they didn't find the body, he was acquitted. He was then almost immediately arrested for killing Raymond Loxley, a brothel owner 2 years prior. And again, he was acquitted. After that, he tried to improve his life and, just be on the right track by moving to Sydney and working as a bodyguard for crime figure George Freeman. Caught in the gang wars, he got paranoid and would always carry a gun with him wherever he went. In 1984, he was suspected of attempting to kill a drug squad detective, and things got messy when shots rained down on Christopher's house. Everyone survived and business continued. The next year, he was sent to kill Tony Spaghetti Eustace, and he managed to shoot him 6 times, but not enough to actually kill him. Police tried to speak to him, but he told them to F off, and then he died. Later that year, his boss Freeman called him for a meeting, and as he left, he caught a cab and went on his way. But he disappeared, leaving 2 children behind, never to return. So either Freeman killed him or he split because he was scared he would be killed. Either way, he's a fugitive on the run. Filling at number 3 slot is Hayat Boumediene. Now Hayat had her fair share of a bad life. Her mum died when she was 8, her dad wasn't there, and she was tossed between families and foster care and was beaten numerous times. In July of 2009, she married Ahmadi Coulibaly, and both were Muslim and extremely religious to an extremist level. In 2010, police found a bunch of assault rifle ammunition in their apartment, which is, not the best. Now Hayat was sought after by authorities because her husband was the prime suspect for the 2015 Montrouge shooting that was one of the Ile-de-France attacks. The shooting involved 3 attackers that killed 17 people before the police eventually shot all 3, and Ahmadi was one of them. But before any of this even happened, he had already helped Hayat flee the country. She traveled to Spain at the end of 2014 and then made it to Istanbul, where Turkish intelligence found it to be sus. They surveilled her for the next 2 days, after which she went to the Syrian border. At this time, her husband had just used her car in another attack, and she was complicit in it. She's still currently wanted for helping Ahmadi carry out his attacks and has been dubbed France's most wanted woman. Now at number 2 is Lord Lucan, aka Richard John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan. I know, right? I love when noble people are on here, it's just that much juicier. So after World War II, Lucan was studying at Eton College, which is a very posh all-boys college in the UK for like the 1%. Now sadly, he took a liking to gambling and went on to become a professional gambler. The man was so hot, he was even considered to play James Bond, like, hello. He was hot. By 1963, he married Veronica Duncan and the couple had 3 children together, but after 9 years together, the marriage was going up in flames. Lucan moved out of the family home and a huge custody battle occurred over the kids, which he lost. After taking so many hits in his personal life, Lucan became depressed, paranoid, and erratic. All his gambling losses didn't help the situation either. To try and get custody, he started spying on Veronica to prove she was unfit to raise the kids since she had postnatal depression and had just fired their long-term nanny. After many nannies came Sandra Rivet in 1974. On the 7th of November, after putting the kids to bed, she went to the basement to make tea for Veronica, and once there, someone bludgeoned her to death with a lead pipe as the murderer told her to shut up. Apparently, Veronica heard her husband's voice and went down there, wherein they started fighting as well. Eventually, he admitted he had just killed Sandra, and Veronica agreed to help him escape. But the smart girl made a run for it and got away, after which Lord Lucan just disappeared. He called his mother and went to a friend's house, and then literally into thin air, he was gone. He literally evaporated. I don't get how someone so prolific like him could have successfully hidden for that long. He was declared legally dead in 2016 at age 81, but you can't just assume someone's dead because they're 80 years old. Come on now. People live long lives. And finally, at number 1 is Assata Shakur. Now this woman has racked up quite a few charges in her long life. As a former member of the Black Liberation Army and Black Panther Party, political and racial activism were her whole life. And the BLA engaged in many armed shootouts against the government since they would rob banks and kill police officers. At the start of the 70s, there was a multi-state manhunt for her after she had robbed a bank in Queens, then in the Bronx, and even a church, which was called Our Lady of the Presentation Church. The manhunt started after the FBI believed she was the head of a BLA cell that had killed a bunch of police officers. During the New Jersey Turnpike shootout, Assata killed Trooper Werner Forrester by shooting him in the head twice with his own gun, but both sides had been wounded. Between 1973 and 77, she had been indicted 10 times for kidnapping a heroin dealer, 2 bank robberies, 2 attempted murders of officers, and the rest of the charges were due to Turnpike. Many trials and mistrials occurred, of which she was only convicted once, acquitted thrice, and dismissed thrice. She was kept at Rikers Island in solitary confinement, but fellow BLA member Angela Davis claimed she was a political prisoner, so they started planning her escape. 3 members of the army got to the prison with dynamite and 2 guns, taking 2 officers hostage before escaping in a van. Wanted posters were put up for her, but in retaliation, her supporters put up Assata Shakur is welcome here posters in response. In 1984, she was given political asylum in Cuba, but the FBI is still offering $2 million for her. Fun fact, she's actually Tupac's godmother and step-aunt. Pretty cool. Starting us off at number 10 is Ricardo Ash. This guy has impressive qualifications. He's a gynecologist, obstetrician, endocrinologist, and a fugitive. He pioneered GIFT, aka gamete intrafallopian transfer, which is not something you'd think a criminal could be capable of doing. However, in 1995, Ricardo and his 2 partners were accused of taking women's eggs without their consent and using it for other patients so they could conceive. 15 children were born from the misuse of these eggs, but he wasn't arrested since technically this wasn't a crime. Worried he could somehow end up in jail, Ricardo sold his properties and fled to Mexico and was arrested in Argentina in 2004. An extradition request for him was denied and he fled back to Mexico, where he was rearrested in 2010. He was set for parole in 2011 and was released, but the US still wanted to extradite him, yet he's nowhere to be found. It's been 9 years, no one knows where the hell Ricardo is. And he stole some people's eggs, so he needs to get arrested.
In our number 9 spot today, we have Victor and Natalia Wolff. We've got a 2-for-1 on this one, a husband and wife team like Bonnie and Clyde, who are on the run for their alleged involvement in a massive real estate scheme. Of course, it's not a new idea to buy real estate for cheap and then sell it for more than you purchased it for, but these guys decided to go one step further and skip that whole first part. They wouldn't even buy the properties, they just sell them. They targeted immigrants mainly, and what they would do is drop fake ownership documents for properties and then basically just sell them, even though they obviously had no legal right to do that. By doing this, the pair was living in a lap of luxury. They had fancy jewelry, luxury cars that included a $350,000 Maybach. They were living out their dream, but this was back in the early 2000s, and everything changed when the housing bubble burst. In the end, the pair was indicted by a grand jury in 2011, but by then it was too late. The couple had fled and no one has been able to locate them since. They are said to have had ties in Florida, Arkansas, Texas, and New York, but authorities think that they might just be living in Russia.
At number 8 we have Omid Tavili. Iranian-Canadian Omid is a gangster who is the kingpin of a huge crime family in Canada. The RCMP revealed he was arrested back in 2000 for having 3 kilograms of cocaine on him, but was found not guilty. He then ran a scam telemarketing business aimed at Americans and ended up stealing $3 million, mostly from old people that just fell for the scam. He was arrested in British Columbia in 2003 after the US District Court issued a federal arrest warrant for him. 2 years later, he realized $300,000 of his drug money had gone missing and guessed it was his career that had taken it and fled. So to enact revenge, he kidnapped the dude's brother-in-law, sexually assaulted him, and then interrogated him before getting arrested himself. In 2007, the BC Supreme Court ordered him to be extradited to the US, but that didn't scare Omid since Amandeep Singh was his lawyer. The criminal and extradition lawyer that literally represents all these controversial criminals like Rakesh Saxena. Like, you know, he's getting a lot of money for defending these criminals, but whatever. Either way, they filed for an appeal, and while waiting for the result, Omid disguised himself as janitor Edwin Teesney and escaped from jail. No one knows where he is today. Filling at number 7 slot is Alfred Stark. At 92 years old, this man committed heinous war crimes when he was a Nazi in the 40s. Anyway, he was accused of ordering the execution of 117 Italian prisoners of war. This was part of the slaughter of nearly 9,500 officers after the Germany-Italy alliance went to shit. The military court of Rome literally indicted him in 2012 and sentenced him to life in prison, but Germany still refuses to extradite him to Italy to serve his sentence. I've heard about a lot of Nazis that fled to South America and are just living there under new names, but this dude is literally sat at home in Germany hiding in plain sight because he knows the government won't do shit. Like, this man committed war crimes. Those are crimes against humanity and he has to be punished for them. Now at number 6 is John Rufo. Now this guy was the president of CCS, which is an IBM equipment reseller, before he went into hiding, so I mean, the man had moolah. Either way, in 1992 he met with his friend Edward J. Reynes, who had just been laid off from Philip Morris USA, and he told John about Project Star. It involved pitching a fake project to various bank executives claiming they were working on a top secret operation to develop smokeless cigarettes on behalf of Philip Morris. Newsflash, they're called vapes. Either way, John had a company, so it was very easy to forge everything they needed, and because Edward used to work with Philip, they never actually had to contact him. It was all going to plan until 96 when an employee noticed something off in one of the documents. He contacted Philip, then the FBI, and then everything went tits up. The duo had managed to get $350 million, but the FBI couldn't locate 21 million of it, so either way, where did it go? Edward was arrested and John went on the run. He didn't turn himself in and was last seen taking money out of an ATM before never being seen again. His car was found abandoned at JFK Airport, and he's currently still in hiding. $25,000 is being offered for any information on him, and he's actually in the US Marshals 15 Most Wanted list. Coming in at number 5 is Akhlaq Fakir Mohammed Sheikh. The Indian 29-year-old murderer has been in hiding since 2006. Gudrun Kovinu was an archaeologist that was a part of the Afar expedition undertaken in Ethiopia that led to the discovery of the skeleton Lucy. She was working at the Nepal Research Center and had moved there in 1984. For some reason, and no one knows why, I couldn't figure out why or find out why, but Akhlaq stabbed her to death before beheading her. She's an archaeologist, what did she do? Bund Garden police found her head within 7 hours of the murder and arrested him. The police then gave him 2 weeks parole to try and care for his sick wife, but that was the last time he was seen. They're assuming he ran off with his wife and mum and is currently still in hiding. I just don't get what possessed him to do that. At number 4 is Gilbert Winter. British-born Gilbert worked as a jeweler by day and enforcer for the Addams Family crime syndicate by night. Who knew a jeweler's life could be that dangerous? Nobody. But the Addams Family, aka the Clerkenwell crime syndicate, is an Irish criminal organisation and is one of the most powerful ones in the UK. They're worth £200 million and have been linked to nearly 30 murders. In 1994, Gilbert and fellow enforcer Ray Barton ended up killing a drug dealer called Claude Mosley with a samurai sword, which, I mean, fashionable, I have to say. They offed Claude because he was pocketing money from a drug operation run by the Adams family, and that didn't go down well with them. Gilbert was put on trial for the murder, but since no one would testify, the case was dropped. Fast forward to March 1998, Gilbert vanishes into thin air. He was involved in a weed deal in which £800,000 went missing, so either he ran off with the money or the gang killed him. Saul in the Home, the family's financial advisor who was also part of that deal, was shot months later, so people think Gilbert disappeared so the family wouldn't kill him. Regardless, he's still a murderer and he's still wanted. Filling our number 3 slot is Archimez Gachiayev. This guy used to serve in the Russian Strategic Rocket Forces and had been accused of being involved in the Russian apartment bombings of 1999 that killed nearly 300 people and kickstarted the Second Chechen War. 4 bombings took place between September 4th and 9th and targeted 4 apartment blocks. The bombs were later found on grounds that Archimez rented with 2 other people who founded his company. After the first 2 bombs went off, he actually called the police and warned them, so maybe he had had a change of heart midway. According to the Federal Security Service of Russia, he was given $500,000 from warlord Ibn al-Khattab for doing the deed. As the case was further investigated, Archimez fled to Georgia and then Turkey. He was last seen in March of 2002 and is still a fugitive in hiding that is wanted for terrorism. Now at number 2 is Pedro Alonso Lopez, known as the Monster of the Andes. Pedro is a serial killer who took the lives of many. Growing up, his mother worked as a prostitute, which had adverse effects on him. When he was 8, he was caught touching his younger sister, which caused him to get kicked out of his home. He then fled to Colombia, where a man took him in and repeatedly sodomized him, and the abuse continued even from other males after that. At 18 years old, he started stealing cars for a living and was soon caught and arrested. Apparently, while he was in jail, he was gang raped, and that left him so angry he killed all those involved while he was still in jail. When he got out though, he started killing girls in Peru, and by 1978 he had murdered over 100 people. The police had him but released him, and so he moved to Ecuador, killing up to 3 girls a week. By 1980 he was arrested in an abduction gone wrong and confessed to killing 103 girls, but was released 8 years later for good behavior. Over the next 15 years he was arrested, released, and re-arrested before getting free in 98. He's currently still wanted for killing and over 300 girls in Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. And finally, at number 1 is Xavier Dupont de Ligón. I put this one on the list because Unsolved Mysteries inspired me, to be honest, and the case is very interesting. So back in April of 2011, the family's neighbor got suspicious when the Ligón's home was boarded up and decided to call the police. The family was nowhere to be found until a letter came saying they had fled to the US since the parents were DEA agents. That was obviously fake, and after several police visits to the house, the bodies of the wife Agnes, the 4 kids, and the 2 dogs were all found buried in their garden. Xavier's body was not there, and neither was his car. So already we have prime suspect number 1, the dad. Now everyone had been shot by a rifle that Xavier had inherited from his dad 3 weeks prior. Apparently he was under crippling debt and had no money left, and as a count he didn't want his children or the public to know the family was ruined. He also didn't want his kids to suffer any hardships either, so apparently he thought killing them was the best thing to do. After he fled, he didn't even hide. He was still using his credit card at places and waved at a security camera in southeastern France before taking off with his rifle and leaving his car. If he did commit suicide, the body was never found, and if he fled, well, he's still wanted.
At number 10, a contortionist. In 2011, a lot of people were having valuables stolen on the route between Girona Airport and Barcelona, Spain. It was only an hour-long bus trip and the bags stayed in the baggage compartment. So, what was happening? It turns out a contortionist was working with accomplices to steal laptops and other valuables on the frequent trips. One man would load a suitcase onto the bus at the airport, and then another man would pick it up in Barcelona. The contortionist in the suitcase would get out in between the stops and look for valuables with a flashlight. So the best joke about this one comes from a police spokesman. I believe this is what the British call an open and shut case. Because it's a suitcase. It's just funny.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the River City Ripper. One of the most terrifying things that exists are serial killers who are still on the loose, especially when you find out that they've been recently active. This serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, 3 of which were fatal. These horrific crimes took place between August of 2020 and April of 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and being able to provide a description of the assailant, there is still very very little to go on in terms of being able to identify this horrible human. The FBI was contacted shortly after the survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created a profile of this unidentified killer. These crimes are terrible any way you spin them, but one of the most terrifying parts is that they were all just completely random acts of violence that occurred just unprovoked. The case has gained quite a bit of attention, but still, the monster remains at large.
At number 8, we have a boy being smuggled. Now, another time in 2015, a 19-year-old Moroccan woman was looking nervous as she waited to cross the border. She was crossing at a land border crossing at Ceuta, a Spanish enclave city in North Africa. When the guards put her suitcase through a scanner, they discovered an 8-year-old boy in her suitcase. Just think about it. See the photo. So it turns out she was trying to smuggle the boy into Europe for her husband, the boy's father. At the border, she was detained as well as the father of the child eventually when he showed up. Now, since you obviously shouldn't try to put a person in a suitcase, especially a child, the Ceuta magistrate ordered the father to be held on charges of human rights abuse. Now, if you have the child's permission like David Dobrik did in one of his recent videos, the line, who knows? Plus, that was only for a couple minutes, not for an entire border crossing. But on to number 7, a YouTuber. An Australian YouTuber named Adam Saleh put out a YouTube video where he flew on a Tiger Airways flight in a suitcase. Now, it shows his friend zipping him in a suitcase and then picking him up after the flight. But Tiger Airways themselves tweeted back at Saleh and said that they saw a bunch of inconsistencies in the video. So no, he didn't make it across, all the way, in the suitcase. So the airway pointed out they had footage of him boarding the plane, plus that he was too heavy to be put on board as luggage as per their restrictions, and they also said he would have suffocated, or at least become a popsicle. Now, Saleh didn't expect the media attention as it was a prank for entertainment on his channel, but you do have to expect that airlines don't want people attempting this if they think it's true. If you think plane delays are bad now, just imagine if airlines keep finding people in suitcases. It's gonna be a big holdup. Really? At number 6, we have some Walmart shenanigans. So years ago, a guy went to Walmart with his buddies when they were bored. You know, how it is in the burbs. So that particular Walmart had had a lot of thefts lately, and this is important to remember. So when the group of teens got there, they were looking around trying to think of something to do when the main guy telling this story sees a suitcase. He gets many ideas, but convinces his buddies of one for sure. The manager of the store already answered their question about megaphones and is now seeing this group of teens cast glances around the store. So he's a bit suspicious. So then, the group of teens gets the main guy into the suitcase and they walk around the store with the talking suitcase, making noises, generally stirring a little fun among the other customers. So a bunch of people are giving them weird looks, but overall they're just having a grand old time. But then the manager spots the teens again and he just sees two guys dragging a heavy suitcase towards the front of the store. So with all of the thefts lately, he thinks the youths are just trying to run off with a bunch of liquor. Now, the teens catch on to the fact that the manager has caught them and the main guy escapes from the suitcase just so they can all make a run for it. Now the group of guys runs out with the manager hot on their heels and a cop that was sitting in the parking lot throws on its lights to try to chase him down. So the cop catches up and tells them that he got calls from the manager and they found the suitcase inside, but no liquor. So then the cop asks them what was in the suitcase. And so the main guy, who hid in the suitcase, just raises his hand. So the full story, if you want to read it in detail, is on Reddit by Pyronius. It's a fun one, I like the way he narrated it. On to number 5, bag on a train. Swiss officials found an Eritrean man hiding in a suitcase. So it looks like the 6-foot guy shoved his body into a carry-on, and it's pretty unbelievable. It turns out the man was trying to catch a train from Italy to Switzerland without being caught. And the thing is, when you're that tall, trying to be confined into a carry-on, it's not comfortable, and he was making noises of discomfort, obviously. So those noises drew the attention of security who went to investigate the bag, and the man emerged from the bag with his hand unzipping the luggage, and then he popped out. Now, this was a first for officials who had seen people hiding in trunks of cars, but not luggage trunks. In the video itself, it's just kind of amazing to watch. Just the zipping and then his arm comes out and his head pops out and he's like, hello. He doesn't say hello, he's just detained by officers, but. Now, to number 4, remember to pack your wife. So, a 60-something man was traveling from Nice to Moscow. He had a really big suitcase and was struggling to pull it along, because it appeared quite heavy to officials. Now, as I said, the officials, they got on and they discovered something unauthorized packed in his bag. It was his wife. His wife is a Russian woman in her 30s, and he believed that she wouldn't be allowed into the EU. And so his belief did have a hint of truth in it, since non-EU citizens wouldn't be allowed, but the thing is his wife would, since she is married to an EU citizen. him. Now, I find it funny that his first idea isn't to look up or double check that she isn't allowed or the different things that can be authorized, but his mind immediately went to, well, honey, if you want to go to Nice, you gotta get in the bag. Like, gee, how does his mind go there first? You know, think it through, people. Think it through. On to number 3. A baby. Now this is horrifying, okay? Back in 2016, a woman on an Air France flight from Istanbul to Paris allegedly smuggled her baby on a plane. Now, 3.5 hours into the flight, witnesses noticed that something in her bag was moving when she opened it, and they saw a baby girl. Now, this reportedly happened because the paperwork for her baby was not in order. It is said that she was past customs when she was stopped from boarding with the baby, and reports say that she bought another ticket, hid the baby, and went to a different gate to board a different flight. Now, in this case, this means the baby made it past the initial screening, but then was stopped afterwards. Also, once you get to the gate of an airplane, people only check passports and boarding passes, so it does seem plausible that the baby was hidden in the woman's cloth bag at this time. Still though, just think of the safety of that baby. It's just in a carry-on on a flight for hours. No, it's just too much. At number 2, guess what we have? A baby, again. So again, this year, not 3 years ago, this year, someone tried this. In September, officials explained that a US woman was carrying a 6-day-old baby in her luggage. They said she passed through the airport immigration counter without declaring that she was traveling with the baby, and they said that there was intent to hide that she was with the baby. She was caught at the boarding gate by airline personnel who searched her oversized suitcase and found the child inside the oversized suitcase. So she was arrested after she was found to not have any travel documents for the baby. Then after the woman was arrested, she gave officials an affidavit at the airport. The affidavit was allegedly from the baby's mother giving permission to take the child into the US, but it wasn't signed by the mother. Therefore, it's inadmissible in court. So now the case is being handled by anti-human trafficking investigators from Philippines National Bureau of Investigation because it's a very serious thing. You shouldn't try to smuggle a baby that is not yours into another country. I don't know why I'm staring off into the distance, but it should... People, you know? Now let's move on to number 1, a prison bust. So in January of 2017, a Venezuelan woman went to the prison where her husband is. She went along with their 6-year-old daughter, rolling along some of her daughter's toys in a bright pink suitcase. Then, while she was there for a visit, her husband popped into that suitcase in hopes for an escape. Now, their escape plan failed as guards noticed her having trouble pushing the overstuffed suitcase, and when they found her husband, just curled up in the suitcase along with the toys, they sent him right back to his cell to serve out the rest of his 10-year sentence for car robbery. Now, because of the attempted help in the prison escape, the wife was arrested and their daughter was taken into temporary custody by social services. So, prison escapes in a bright pink bag might not be the best bet. Just throwing that out there. Maybe. Who knows?